Good morning and welcome to Coffee Time with Kauffman, the comfortable place to talk about women's leadership. Today, I'm here with Mel Butcher. Hey, Mel.
Hello, so nice to see you.
Mel is currently serving as a business development coordinator at Carollo. She also serves as a leader inside A Career That Soars, which is a career support group for ambitious women. She also creates resources and cohorts for young engineers via Underdog Engineers. And today, we are talking about how the holistic definition of leadership supports women. But before I get into that, my name is Maria Kauffman, and I'm an engineer turned life coach. And today I'm drinking, this is my second cup of a flavored coffee. I did the Southern Pecan this morning. What are you drinking, Mel?
Well, I've got some cold brew because it's pretty warm here.
Nice. Finally, right?
Right.
Awesome. Mel, tell us about yourself and what makes you so successful and gets you into all of these amazing things you do for women's leadership.
Well, thank you, Maria. Thanks so much for the kind words, and thank you for having me today. So just briefly, I am trained as an engineer. I work for Carollo Engineers, but I have a bit of a circuitous path. So my first degree that I earned was in language. I worked for the government for a while, and then I went back to school for engineering. And, a couple of things happened early in my entry into engineering. So the first thing is, when I was in school for engineering, I realized quickly, wow, there's not as many women here as there should be. It's pretty skewed. And so from that point, I started to learn more about the challenges that women face in STEM fields. And that has become part of the driver for me to support women in their careers, which I'm sure is very similar for you, Maria. And I also could see things a little differently because I was in engineering school as an older student, let's say, and I noticed some of the challenges that my colleagues, my younger colleagues, were facing as they went on the job hunt. Right, so there's things that engineers just don't get taught in school, and that's really the impetus for me starting the resources and courses that I developed for Underdog Engineers. So that's the nutshell version. Did that answer your question?
Well, yes, but that's not only circuitous, but it's very abnormal to get into engineering from like a language source. So that actually sounds very, very courageous. And not only that, but on top of that, you were able to bring on this awareness of what some people were maybe missing. And you almost immediately, it sounds like you filled that gap. I was not so good at that part. I was just, grinding it out and just thinking, oh, this is just a difficult situation. Let me just, grind it out. So I don't know, that super courage. What was a little bit more about what got you into engineering? Tell us a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be just completely honest here. So I grew up in a small town, and I grew up to a extensively military family. So, I would also say that many of the people in my family had sort of traditional gendered paths. So men in the family went into the military, women in the family were school teachers and secretaries and whatnot. So when I went to university the first time, I simply did not have the guidance or support that I needed to make good decisions. I got this message after growing up in a small town. It was basically just like, well, go to college and then get the degree and good things will happen, right? And I know a lot of people have come from a similar space where they learn the hard way that that's simply not true. So the first time through school, I didn't have what I needed to make a good career choice. And beyond that, I've talked about this in some other places, but I'll briefly share this here. When I was attending the University of Texas, Arlington, this would have been 2005, 2006. I was just completely lost. I didn't know what to do in school. And at one point I thought that I would double major. And so I registered for some additional science classes and whatnot. And I was thinking, well, I'll go ahead and finish the language stuff because I have so many hours towards it, but I should probably add something else, but I don't know what. So anyway, I registered for these classes. One of them is chemistry. And at the beginning of the semester, I was in the chemistry lab class. And, I remember this because it's like it happened in slow motion. I raised my hand and I asked the instructor a question. And in front of the entire class, he laughed at me and then said, "This is why women don't belong in science." And, I have to say that moment, it wasn't that moment a turning point itself, but that moment was pretty much a culmination of all of the underlying messages that came from my surroundings growing up as a woman, a female in Texas. So he was just giving voice to all of the other messages that I had subtly received my entire life. You don't belong here. Women aren't smart enough for this, whatever. So the university effectively did nothing. I think I got an apology letter maybe 6 months later. And, I ended up deciding to just leave university at that point with just a language degree. So I'm taking you down a little bit of a right turn here on this path, but
okay. Love it though. Love the story already.
Yeah. So all of that to say that I didn't have what I needed to make good choices the first time, but I got out of school, and after some experience in the real world, let's say, I had a really good experience at the agency I worked for. I had a really wonderful boss named Joe. Joe helped me grow as a professional. And through that, I gained the confidence and new understanding for me, really, of, I didn't have the words for it at this point, but basically the growth mindset. It was the first time in my life that I really internalized that and had a sense of, I can set my mind to something and do it. And so when I decided to go back to school, it had to do with the economic downturn of 2008 and 9. So I needed a job at that point, couldn't find one. And still, I didn't have like guidance or mentorship in my life. And what I did was I went to the Occupational Outlook Handbook that's published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I basically searched for career paths that had math and science that were also projecting like high opportunities. And that was engineering. And I really had no idea what I was getting into. I was like, well, I guess I'll register for engineering. And so like in my naivete, I'm like, all right, first semester, I'm going to take Calc 1 and Physics 1, and like never had pre-calc in my life. And hadn't taken trigonometry or any of that. And I just like dove in, and it was kind of baptism by fire,
Wow. Wow. On like a couple of things. So first of all, even to register for a chemistry class, like, the first time, like chemistry, especially in college, is not easy. Like I didn't even want to take it. That was a tough one. So then for you to later on, just take a very, very logical, right? It sounds like you're totally left side of your brain. You're like, okay, let's just go to this book, find the guy, do the the math part, and find out the trajectory, and we'll just go for it. That so speaks to so many levels. It sounds like maybe even math and science all along, even from an early age, wasn't a fear for you? Or how did you treat those subjects in your early ages?
Well, gosh, so I try not to think about the past too much, but there was one point years ago, maybe when I was in school for engineering, when I was at my parents' house going through some boxes, and I found old report cards or whatever. So I could look at those and see that when I was young and in high school, I did incredibly well in math and science. I didn't do well in like English and literature kind of things. Wow. And I didn't have that internalized though as like, I'm good at this. What I remembered more is that in junior high, I needed a tutor for algebra. And I carried this idea with me. I carried this story. Okay. I was telling myself a story because of that because I needed a tutor, I was like not good at it or not smart. Right. And what I came to realize later is that, well, no, I needed a tutor because my junior high algebra teacher had a huge temper and he scared me. I was afraid of him in class because he was such an angry person. And actually, I can do all of these things and learn these things. And, needing a tutor doesn't mean anything. And like full disclosure, I used tutors all the way through my engineering program because I was thinking like, look, I don't want to have to repeat a class. I don't have time for that. I need to get through this. I need to pass. I need to go through as quickly as possible. So I had a tutor all the way through. And if any of you out there are watching and you went to University of South Florida, you might remember Tom the tutor. So effing smart, like best tutor in the whole world.
Awesome. So go for the tutor. Boy, I wish I would have had friends and that kind of insight way a long time. By the time I got to college, I just remember, I think like you said, and I don't even know in the moment if I had the awareness, but definitely it kind of came later. It was like, why am I so afraid to be in a study group with these other men? I literally, as I reflected definitely later, I came to understand that all of those messages must have been imprinting so much that I couldn't even participate in a study group because internally that message was, I have nothing to contribute. And therefore, and I wasn't smart enough to go for the tutor either. So my grades suffered, just everything suffered because of those internal messages. I love to be talking about this stuff because, like you said, go for the right. Tom down in Southern Florida, right? Awesome. So now life is different. You are doing all kinds of amazing things for everyone. And we are talking about, I love the title, right? The holistic definition of leadership naturally supports women. Tell us about that.
Okay. Yeah, this is something that I came to learn about through a lovely woman named Susan Colantuno. So Susan gave a TED Talk that summarizes some of the foundation of what I'm going to explain today. And her TED Talk is titled "The Career Advice You Probably Didn't Get." So dear listener, if you haven't seen that, please go and watch it. So Susan wrote this definition of leadership, and I like to call it the holistic definition of leadership because it's the only definition that I've come across that really encompasses all of the pieces that someone needs to be successful at all levels, particularly the highest levels of leadership in a business or organization, right? And what we see a lot today is there are all of these kind of leadership gurus out there, and we like to quote them and whatnot. And the aspects of leadership that they talk about are actually quite narrow and limiting, and they do a disservice in particular to women who want to advance. So I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. So the definition is Leadership is using the greatness in you to achieve and sustain extraordinary outcomes by engaging the greatness in others. So it's a 3-part definition. And most of the time, when we're talking about leadership, when it's online, it's on LinkedIn, whatever, it's usually covering 2 aspects of that. It's using the greatness in you, which is to say things like your skills, your values, charisma, good public speaking. It's the attributes that you have as an individual. So using the greatness in you, or engaging the greatness in others, which is things like your ability to build a team, to foster collaboration, to engage with a client and have a good relationship with them, right? So those are the things that we typically focus on. And what the research shows us is that women are typically ranked by their superiors as being as good or better than their male counterparts in those areas. Okay. Using the greatness in you, yourself, and engaging the greatness in others. So that latter part, engaging the greatness in others, is often where women exceed their male counterparts. They're ranked higher, right?
Right.
Okay. But where women do not rank as high as their male peers is the third part, the part that we hardly ever seen talked about, and the part that rarely makes it into traditional leadership training programs, which is achieving and sustaining extraordinary outcomes. Another way to put that is using business, strategic, and financial acumen to create outcomes for the organization, right?
Yes.
So that's where we focus inside a career that soars. That's why we focus on helping women understand the outcomes that they need to create for their organization, and also how they need to talk about those outcomes using the language of power. And that's what we know helps close the gender leadership gap at the top, right? Because when it comes to advancing to the highest levels of organizations, when it comes to getting into the V and C suite, the executive level leadership, the achieving and sustaining extraordinary outcomes pillar of the 3-part definition is ranked twice as high as the other aspects of leadership, right? So if you think about, we see all these quotes from people like Simon Sinek and Adam Grant that are almost exclusively about personal greatness and engaging the greatness in others. It completely misses the pieces of leadership that women need additional support and training to get to those highest levels of leadership. So I have a lot to say about this, but let me pause there.
Love it. So I totally agree as well. So from my perspective, what I like to get into is understanding a little bit, kind of like your story. I think there's a lot of women out there still going through this same thing, where there's, let's just say stereotypically, this difference between men's leadership and women's leadership. And what I notice also is that from my experience, I must have bought into the girl thing or the woman thing, where you're not allowed to brag, you're not allowed to do all these things, right? They kind of put us in a box. And the more reflection I came across even in my coaching business is like, it's such a simple thing, where it's like, when men, like, they just tally it up. And if you think about it, at the end of the day, it's just like, oh yeah, like the guy will get to the end of the day and be like, oh, I did all these things. And it's just business acumen. It's logical. It's just like, building these blocks of the achievement part. Where women, it's not like we don't do it. We go out there and we contribute, we build those same blocks, but at the end of the day, we don't give ourselves the credit for what we've done. And then, so there is definitely this mismatch on that pillar, where that's where, from a certain perspective, you can see like, wait a minute, definitely in my career, there have been men who are less capable than me getting greater success. And I have to wonder, what's going on here? But part of that is that getting to the end of the day and being like, oh my gosh, day after day, I just don't even give myself credit for the business aspect of what I contribute.
Yeah, and there's a lot of layers to this, right? So you're hitting on a couple of different things here, and one of them is something that we see quite often with women, which is they've internalized a myth that we've been taught, right? This is part of our culture and society. We've been taught this idea that, you just work hard enough and eventually someone will see it and it'll pay off, right? They'll see your hard work and they'll, help you up the ladder or whatever. And that's simply not true. That mindset completely ignores all of the human elements of what's happening in an organization, right? We like to work with people and promote people that we know, like, and respect. And sometimes the squeaky wheel is what gets the oil, right? You've got to be able to articulate the outcomes that your work is creating for an organization. You can't just rely on your hard work to speak for itself, so to say,
Right. Yes, because that I know, like I said, in my experience too, there was these tricky spots. And I'll have to say, when I was really able to kind of give it space. And what I mean by that is, like, I notice this, I get mad about it because on some level I'm like, it doesn't seem fair. Like, why is this guy who can't, tie his shoes, like, getting promoted, and now he's my boss? And what happened here? So it put me into some pretty interesting situations. And maybe it always kind of happened, but later in my career, once I got past that 10 to 20 year mark, right? And like, you've just been doing this for long enough that you kind of have that meter that says, wait a minute, something's not right here. Let me see how and what I can do about it now. So help us understand, what can we and should we be doing then as holistic leaders, right? Because holistically, it sounds like from a statistical place, these other pillars are actually, we're outranking.
Yes. And so I did a bit of a ranty monologue about a week ago because I came across this HBR article that a couple of men had published, and it was published in 2019, and it headlined something like, research shows women outrank men in, most of these areas of leadership that we measured, right? And the authors, said something in it like, oh, we're baffled at how come women aren't making it to the top of organizations, even though, we are able to show a statistically significant higher ranking for these women based on what their managers are saying. Okay, this is not like self-ranking here.
Right.
And so, I got really frustrated with it because it's like, listen, there are reasons that women are hindered from making it to the top, and we can't just chalk it all up to unconscious bias, right? So to answer your question, there's two different paths we can take this, right? So one path is for the individual women who are listening to this that want to advance in their careers. There's several things. You can't rely on your hard work to get you to the top. That's simply not, it's not going to take you there. You need mentorship to get better at certain aspects of your trade and your business, but you also need to cultivate a strategic network. You need to cultivate someone that could become a sponsor for you, right? You need to be working in a way that you can earn or garner sponsorship. You probably need to take the initiative to understand this third pillar that we're talking about, understanding how to tie your work to the strategic goals of the organization and the financial goals of the organization. That's something we do inside a career that soars. And the big resource that I would point you to is Susan's book. So if you listen to her TED Talk, the career advice you probably didn't get, and it resonates with you, check out her book as well. It's so good. No ceiling, no walls. So those are big resources for you. And then the second place that we can go with your question is, what should leaders be doing? What should leaders of organizations that are serious about supporting their female talent pipeline, what should they be doing? And I want to say a couple things about that. So the first one is, you should not rely on one-off things to correct the problems that you have with equity and inclusion in your organization. And what I mean by that is, you can't just throw unconscious bias training at your leaders and expect that to make a difference. Oh. And in fact, research shows that might actually make things worse. So that's not a solution to your problem, nor is relying on employee resource groups or business resource groups that are volunteering hours to support one another to just magically fix the ingrained problems of your organization. You might need to hire outside professional experts to come in and start some of the movement, the change that needs to happen in the organization. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is, if your company is putting out any kind of leadership training, or maybe you're paying to send your high potential employees to some type of leadership training, you should audit it. Audit all of the modules of the training and be honest what the modules are focusing on. Because if they are primarily focusing on things like personal greatness and engaging the greatness in others, then frankly, that is training that it's very likely that your men need and your women don't need as much. Does this leadership training have anything at all to do with achieving and sustaining the outcomes that your organization needs to achieve? Does it include anything around business, strategic, and financial acumen? If not, why not? Because if it doesn't contain those things, that is one place to begin to level the playing field for the women in your organization. Because if you seriously care about your female talent pipeline, they have different needs than the men that are coming up through your organization.
Wow. Okay, that was a big wow. So because there's a couple of things that landed for me is, number one, you're suggesting that I'll say companies in general, we'll get to that in a little bit, is that when they look for leadership training, and basically it's comes down to progress for the company. All of these things are efforts for the company to stay sustainable and profitable and all the good things, right? I mean, this is kind of necessary in business. So they're going to hire an outside resource to come in and help them with that growth. And then on top of that, whenever you talk about the auditing, like that's almost like a double dipper then. So it's not just looking and going out for resources that's going to help them with that leadership growth. But then there's this other piece to make sure that when they do that, they're doing this very, very intentionally in a balanced approach. So cool. So that two-step basically then makes me ask, what companies are doing this? Is it only the big ones that are getting those kind of benefits? What do you say to like the small companies? Or to women who are going to listen to this and be like inside of a company? It's like, I don't think my company even cares at all about these things. What do I do?
Right. Well, so if you are a leader in a smaller company that really cares about this, then the easiest resource I would point you to is Susan Colantuno published another book called Make the Most of Mentoring. And it's written in a way that it should be read by both the mentor and the mentee, right? So that's a really good place to start to understand how you can support the women that are in your talent pipeline. So that's number one. For individual women, I mean, I think you have to take initiative, right? If you care about advancing to the top of organizations at any point in your career, that journey starts now, right? And you cannot rely on the corporation that you work for to deliver the training that you need or to set you up with the right mentor, right? You're going to have to seek out these things and do it somewhat on your own. But that's not to say you have to do it alone. There are people like me, people like Maria, people like my partner, Michelle, who are here to support you on the journey to make sure you've got the holistic tools in your leadership belt to advance. And so, you know, in a career that soars, we do want to keep it accessible. So joining a career that soars is a relatively small investment. Right now, I think our rate is $149 for an entire year. And so there's lots of resources inside there that we offer for what we're talking about here today. But let me pause there.
Okay. So I totally agree too, because, you know, after coming out of an engineering career for 30 years, and like I said, I was going through the grind.
Yeah.
And honestly, you know, to my defense, I'll say 30 years ago, life was very, very different.
It was, yeah.
Totally different. But, you know, having all of that for so long, kind of coming out of it, it just speaks to what you just said. Absolutely. I wish I had just even one person to tell me not to rely on anyone else. You know, definitely, even the best bosses I had and the best leadership environments that I was in, where it did seem like I was getting support, it pales in comparison, hindsight, to what I now understand is that a part of that greatness that I had with me all along, but those other influences were just so heavy. And I had a great career. Don't get me wrong, right?
Okay.
Definitely had a great career. But looking back and just seeing myself almost like watching a movie of myself, it was like, man, I was just working so hard for so long and I didn't need to. So if there's no other message that this, you know, lands with somebody, is just advocating for yourself and making sure that you understand that there's tons of resources out there now.
Mm-hmm.
And that it can really line you up for a really amazing career and life to take this path. Like, there are so many rewards.
Right. Yeah. And I've noticed that, especially in STEM fields, certainly a field that's, you know, hard, like engineering, there may be some tendency among some people to take a very sort of independent approach. Like I'm smart, I can do this on my own. And yes, you are smart. And yes, you're a hard worker and you take initiative, and that's great. But none of us get to the top of organizations without help from others, without a strategic network that can shepherd us along the way, that can inform us about opportunities, that can give us insights about the political landscape of something that we're walking into. We all need support from other people. So that's nothing to look down on, right?
And I think I'll just kind of double dip on that comment, because that was like an invisible that I didn't quite understand. Is that, like you said, everybody is getting that. Even the leaders they're all getting that. It's, you know, maybe in the back rooms or in the side alleys, and you
on
don't
the golf
see
course.
On the golf course. This is what's happening. So don't underestimate that. those influences, and definitely don't do it alone. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for like commented, and it was beautifully stated, because that was largely what was missed in my career as well. So let's take help me have a little bit of conversation around, because it sounds like also you're very comfortable kind of talking about women in leadership and men in leadership. What's the melting pot, and what's the benefits then to kind of really understanding the diversity inside of these dynamics?
Well, I'm going to be honest. That's not the way I usually like to go with the conversation, right? Because there are plenty of statistics out there that you can find about the importance of having diversity in all of its manifestations at the leadership level. So it's not just gender, it's race, it's identity, it's culture, it's linguistics, it's ability, disability, all of these different things that we should see represented at all leadership levels in organizations, right? So the information is out there about, companies that have real diversity performing better. But at the end of the day, for me, equity is about being fair, being just, and making a decision about the type of world that we want to live in. Do we want to live in the type of world where people can grow into the best versions of themselves? Do we want to live in a type of society where people can grow into their fullest potential and contribute at the highest and biggest levels that they want to contribute at? Is that the kind of world that we want to live in? Because if we can agree that it is, then we have to support all kinds of people to get to where they're trying to go.
Yeah, I guess that was going to be another avenue that I took the questioning, is that, definitely 30 years ago, like, things were definitely different. We have come a long way. And I can say it is very nice to see that some companies are being a little bit more representative of definitely genders, like you said, definitely races, colors, languages, everything, right? It is starting to change as we step into this future. I like to do like 100 years from now, but even like 5 to 10, because in the past 5 to 10 years, so much has changed. What are some of the benefits that we can start to see, and those advantages? What's the real reward for not only companies, but from a personal perspective? What's the gain?
From a personal perspective, I almost think here, I'm going to give you an example. I almost think that it's impossible for it to just benefit one place. It benefits in multiple different places. So your question makes me think about, I came across this group that is based in Spain, and their goal is all around making the architecture of cities better for women in particular. And so the point for them is that when they think about how a city is laid out, how a park is laid out, how a street and sidewalk is laid out to get from residential area to the train station, from the train station to your work site, etc., women experience it differently. And that's because most of the 3 C's that women do, I'm gonna botch this. Let me make sure I get the 3 C's. This is what Michelle talks about. So cooking, cleaning, and caring, right? So cooking, cleaning, and caring for children or caring for elderly, the vast majority of those 3 C's still gets done by women in the world. And so when we think about changing things to address those experiences, those responsibilities that women still carry, the design changes, right? So when an able-bodied man walks through a city, it is a different experience than a woman who's pushing a stroller and carrying a toddler. There are different needs there. And when we can accept and decide that we want to live in a world that is accessible for everyone involved, including people with disabilities, we make different design choices. And then we make it easier for those people to live their lives and also contribute in the way that they most want to contribute. There's just so many challenges for different people, certainly people with disabilities, to not just physically get where they need to go, but also to access education and achieve those types of goals that they might have. I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole here.
Actually, that was so perfect. Okay, so let me kind of fill in a little bit, because I'm with you. I believe too, like I look at, my career and some of the pluses and minuses after 30 years. And I look at a world where there's such a large rate of divorce. And I can tell you, after relationship, and I say all these, I've traveled the world. And because of the nature of the work that I did, I met so many people around the world. And one thing that somehow in the end, when I look back on all this, I'm like, wow, like, not only was I contributing literally as an engineer to a business to make more money, I was having relationships with these men, and I was listening to some of their problems and some of their challenges. And there was this disconnect where I thought, oh my gosh, the more women we can get into engineering to also then have very similar relationships and show, just show up to work and be yourself and contribute in this way that you are probably very, very natural to execute in your life because you have these skills and talents. Like, because what I know is in those relationships, those work relationships, I'm changing their home life.
Yeah, and so I'd like to try to come back and button this up a little bit, because I want to I want to do an adequate job of making a point here on this, which is that when we have diversity at the table, we get more ideas, and that means we eventually get to better ideas. But I would still go back to at the end of the day, we talk about all of these talent shortages a lot. Well, are we supporting the full spectrum of potential talent out there to reach the highest levels that they can reach? Because if we're not, that means that we're not nurturing the pipeline, and then we're not going to be able to tap into the talent resources that are there, that could be there, right?
Yes.
So if we want the full potential of all humans out there, we've got to be deliberate about supporting different people's needs along the way.
Yes, totally agreed. So let me just touch back on, basically our title for the topic is the holistic definition of leadership supports women.
Yeah. So to come back around to that, so women and men have similar abilities and capabilities when it comes to the complete definition of leadership. And some people might argue that, we're societally conditioned, if we're women, to be better in one area, and men are conditioned or mentored to be better in some other areas. But that doesn't mean that we can't meet and all develop the skills to address all aspects of leadership, right? So if I could have listeners take away one thing today, it's that recognize what the research shows us here, that women don't get the support to develop and learn and demonstrate business, strategic, and financial acumen the same way that men do. And if we are serious about closing the gender leadership gap at the top of organizations, we have to make a choice to support women to gain those skills so that they can earn their place at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just, love what you're saying. I'll just, add a little pieces that I think it really builds respect for everyone. When women are able to step into that leadership role, earn it, and not only have that self-respect, but that self-respect becomes a real lead by example for everyone.
Yeah, no, I mean, nobody's asking for a handout here, and I can't even entertain a conversation like that seriously. We have to acknowledge that the playing field is not level. It's not level for women. It's definitely not level for women of color or women with disabilities, et cetera. So we have to make deliberate changes.
Yeah. So, definitely being someone who did the grind, I'm actually really, really grateful. And actually, I have plenty of stories to talk about where I'm grateful that people didn't give me any handout. Those were really those times where they actually just gave me the opportunity to show myself. And then it really changed things, for them too. I absolutely, it'd be interesting to talk to some of them to see what that change really, how that really changed them. But you can't ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So cool. I could talk to you forever. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Well, thank you so much for engaging with us today. And I'll just recap really quickly. The definition we use is leadership is using the greatness in you to achieve and sustain extraordinary outcomes by engaging the greatness in others. And so I'd love to connect with you or see you inside a career that soars if you feel like that's something that would help you. But definitely I recommend watching Susan Colantuno's TED Talk, The Career Advice You Probably Didn't Get.
Yeah, I did watch that myself. Thank you for that tip, because that was an awesome TED Talk. I totally agree. She does talk about then the specifics on business acumen. And I think when you boil that down and you get into these places where you start to understand that piece, it becomes like, oh yeah, I can do that. And it's not so scary. And it's not such a big, ugly, crazy brown bear. Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally possible. So cool. Thank you so much, Mel, for being with us. I certainly will include in the show notes a lot of the references that you talked about so that they can get in touch with you quickly and easy. So thank you for being a part of the conversation for inspiring women's leadership. Coffee.
My pleasure. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Mel. Coffee Time with Kauffman is the comfortable place to discuss women's leadership, because I am on a mission to help the world discover the truth about what women are capable of. When you are ready for your leadership mastery makeover, go to mariakaufman.com and click on Consult a Coach, where you can schedule time with me for an empowerment session. Have a great week. Enjoy your adventures and journey responsibly.